I think for a lot of us, I mean, just in honesty, I don't see how people can't see the chemtrails.
Okay.
Yep. And then some of the questions I have is, from your point of view, the barium, the aluminum oxide, the strontium, the things that are coming down into our, our plants, our rivers, the beautiful Bow River. I grew up swimming. Oh, incidentally, that is my father.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great picture.
Isn't that wonderful?
That's terrific.
He
cool.
used to jump off the Louise Bridge into the Bow River.
Yeah.
I mean, this is my parents' town. They did so much for me. I
That's
just
a
feel
terrific
really
picture.
devoted to a voice for all of us regarding, possible complications that can come to human health, plants, the whole kit and caboodle.
Got it.
One other thing comes to my mind right away. As the chemtrails blanket out, do you think there's any proof, are you aware of any, that it decreases the temperature in terms of mitigating global warming? I mean, as I understand it, the chemtrails can do their blanketing and they really don't have any effect overall on temperature.
I mean, I don't know what a chemtrail is, so I don't.
So what's your position in all of the geoengineering and the things that a lot of us have heard you say on what in the world are they spraying regarding climate change?
That's a pretty broad question. I mean, climate change. I mean, which question are you asking?
Okay, let me be specific.
Yeah.
If you're not aware of chemtrails, what are you aware of?
Well, that's an M. I mean, yes.
Here,
I'm not trying to be evasive, but I
how
guess
about
all the things I've heard of it.
Can I just come in for a minute?
I mean, I guess let me give you some background. I've worked for 20 years on basically various environmental issues, air quality issues, and climate, both as a doing policy analysis, doing kind of environmental science, and doing technology development. And I've worked probably over that whole time, spent like 10% of my time on geoengineering, which to me means, I mean, just to be clear, let's say what this term means. So to me it means the possibility that people might want to partially and imperfectly counteract some of the risks of global warming. And to be clear, global warming will have benefits and risks and so on, but partially counteract those risks by deliberately cooling the atmosphere by making it more reflective somehow. There are various ways you could do it.
Right.
And my understanding is that essentially, I mean, with tiny quibbly exceptions, nobody is remotely close to actually doing this, and I don't advocate doing it, but I do advocate thinking about it seriously.
Wow, okay.
You're really against CO2. That's really what you're against, is that we're global warming and people...
I wouldn't say, I'm not comfortable saying that. I mean, CO2 is a natural part of the Earth's system. Plants need CO2 to breathe. I'm not a politician, so I'm not for or against things. I'm for openness, telling the truth, trying to be rational, and trying to help people, including including you folks and politicians, whoever comes to ask me, make better decisions about these things.
Gotcha.
So, do I think that if we double or triple the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, it will warm up? Yes. I think that that's science that has actually been pretty well established for more than a century.
Yeah.
That is about as well established at this point as gravity.
What do you think about the scientists that don't believe in global warming, that they believe that's a part of the Earth's process and that it's not human related as much as we want to believe it is?
Well, I don't know what you mean by want to believe. I personally would be wonderful if it wasn't, because then we could go on and deal with other things.
Right.
So I don't buy this want to believe stuff. I don't know, I mean, this is a polarized issue. So first of all, like any pollution debate, there are going to be winners and losers. So when we debated whether or not smoking caused cancer, or when we debated whether or not air pollution killed people, people were paid by the industries to try and make the science seem more complicated than it was to avoid regulation. In fact, some of exactly the same people, so some of the leaders, like Fred Singer, who were the leaders of the campaign to say climate change isn't real, were also leaders and employed by the tobacco industry and ozone to say the same thing. I met him, he's a nice guy, that's his job.
Exactly.
And do I think, and one of the clever things those people tend to do is they say stuff which is true but misleading to people who don't know the science. So I don't actually know anybody
Boy, that sounds
in the
familiar.
world. Pardon?
I said, boy, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean, here's a
that's
simple
true.
way to do it. You say,
It is,
CO2 isn't the main greenhouse gas, it's water vapor. Well, yeah, that's true. That's like a basic truth you get in a first year course on climate physics.
Yeah.
It doesn't prove anything. That's what all the models have in them. Or you say the ice ages weren't caused by climate change, but by CO2. And the answer is no, they weren't. No scientist thinks they are.
Yep.
Or you say maybe it's the sun. But let's just take one example. It's really easy to say. Some people say it's the sun doing the warming,
Right.
but actually no serious scientist that I know of in the world says that. And here's why. Because if it was the sun, you'd expect the lower atmosphere to warm and the upper atmosphere to warm.
Yep.
It turns out from, and I'm going to have a big physics lesson, but from really basic physics that you can't hide, it's like stuff that you get in undergrad, that if the Earth was warming from CO2, you expect the lower part to warm. You actually expect the stratosphere to cool, because the stratosphere radiates more effectively, radiates heat radiation. And so if it was the sun doing it, you'd expect the upper atmosphere and the lower atmosphere to warm. If it was CO2, you'd expect the opposite. So
Right.
then what do we see? You can guess the answer. What you see is that the stratosphere is cooling and the lower atmosphere is warming. From really basic data that would be very hard to fake, just a sec.
Okay.
And so that's an example where in the partly, I think, industry-funded PR campaign, you'll see all sorts of wild things. And when I go talk to my neighbors in the oil industry, they'll say that. But I don't believe there is one person who really works as a normal scientist, just kind of working along, who thinks that.
Right. You see, out here we have such a conservative agenda, and out here we do have the oil companies. Most of us are employed by oil companies. So, yeah, you do have a strong opinion of that out on the street here.
Well, first of all, I don't really get that. I have lots of friends who work in the
Yeah.
oil patch. I happily invest money in the oil patch. I drive a car.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not against the oil patch.
No.
But in any sort of simple black or white way.
Yeah.
But also, the oil patch is not acting in its own best interest to pretend that the science isn't right.
Yes.
Like, RJR Nabisco didn't, in the end, make better decisions for making money for the tobacco shareholders by lying.
Yeah. All right.
What's your opinion on unilateral geoengineering? All of them being combined, like HARP, Bluebeam, all these.
So I don't know what HARP is in
Okay.
geoengineering.
Okay, so HARP with the lower, you just spoke about higher and
As
lower.
far as I know, no, HARP was a experiment to test
And it's
ionosphere
it's
effectivity.
able to superheat the ionosphere with
Don't believe
high
that's
altitude
true.
or frequencies.
So, I mean, this is physics I pretty much
Yeah.
understand, and you're making claims that don't jibe with my
So-
understanding of the world. And so I guess, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
Well, like an extraordinary claim, like 48 hours before the giant tornado in Missouri touching down, HARP researchers predicted it based on satellite imagery coming from HARP and being projected back down the Earth through
There's
HARP.
no satellite imagery coming from
It's
HARP.
it's all over YouTube. You guys have been watching it for years.
You know what? I can just add to what he's saying because I'm in that loop of people that are.
So sorry, HARP is a project that owns satellite imagery?
No.
No.
You can see the satellite on weather pattern,
Yeah.
like satellite imagery.
Yeah.
You can see an erratic formation, like among cloud imagery and different weather patterns. You'll all of a sudden see like I don't even know how to describe it. It's just a.
But the
erratic
satellites aren't
satellite.
HARP satellites, is that
No,
right?
No.
Okay,
These are
okay.
weather satellites.
So
We're
you just,
seeing the
I thought you
imagery
just
from
said.
HARP.
What do you mean the imagery from HARP? I
Like
don't understand.
wherever there's a HARP station located, for example,
There are
Anchorage,
many
Alaska.
HARP stations?
Yeah, Anchorage, Alaska.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Midwest.
a measurement of the energy being.
So then
projected.
you're assuming that basically people they could seal them as something else or something?
See, sorry, I didn't understand that question.
Well,
Oh, there's just multiple HARP antenna arrays positioned
Okay.
throughout the planet in different
Okay.
countries.
and they're like, so lots of scientists have confirmed that it's capable of actually raising the ionosphere
One of the readings
higher
that.
up in
Pushing
Yeah.
it
the
up.
upper atmosphere. Yeah.
It's Tesla's old technology.
Yeah,
you
basically,
Tesla,
yeah.
you're just talking about it's just infrared heat or microwave radio frequency heating.
But to tie that in with the chemtrails, though, with the
Okay.
barium in the atmosphere and stuff like that,
What's
if you
the
were firing
connection?
high frequency,
I mean, I'm just like
So can I
baffled.
take a shot?
Okay, so I understand about making a radio wave that heats things. The heating is utterly trivial compared to the natural heating, and like really basic physics said that if you took all human civilization right now is about 12 terawatts, the entire power of everything in the world.
12 terawatts.
Okay? The solar power is factors of thousands of times bigger than that. So, and obviously the HARP sites aren't using all of human energy, they're using a tiny, tiny fraction of it.
Yeah.
So there's some really basic stuff that just doesn't...
To speak on free energy,
yeah.
could I just get some perspective here of what your understanding is of the destruction of the World Trade Center towers? What do you think caused their dissolution?
Airplanes flying into them.
Okay.
Okay.
This is very important because if you're a person that loves the evidence and the science and wondering how HARP may have the potential to heat the ionosphere, as we're alluding to, I would recommend...
Actually, hold on. I mean, and you guys obviously may not believe, but I do believe there's some pretty basic sort of facts about science.
Right,
to do with conservation of energy. So actually, pretty much, I mean, for me to be convinced that HARP can heat up the ionosphere a lot, I like to see a physics-based argument.
Well, I'd like...
Conspiracy-based argument.
I understand. So that's why I
It's
recommend
meaningless.
highly, if you really want to be respected amongst everyone, not just those that think they like you do, I would recommend you read Dr. Judy Wood's Where Did the Towers Go? Talk about a definitive, empirical, evidence-based science that could blow your mind. Like it's all science. It's so scientific. It's this big, 500 pages. Dr. Judy Wood.
Okay.
Where did the towers go? You read that, and then I think it'll give you a connection to the possibilities of HARP, Tesla's work.
Actually, Dr.
Everything.
Keith, I've been meaning to order that book, so I'll order two and give you one.
It's absolutely incredible. I just finished reading it.
Okay.
Sonia?
It's amazing.
Simone?
So I'm trying to get around this because we won't get anywhere if there's no acknowledgement that chemtrails exist or what chemtrails are. So my question is, there was a conference at the American Association of Advanced Science, which in the film, which you haven't watched, they have you speaking at that conference. And there was questions asked to you about the spraying, I don't want to call it chemtrails, let's just call it
contrails.
Whatever, the spraying of aluminum, barium, and strontium, the aerosol spraying of it. And, quote, what you said in the movie was this, and I want to know what you're referring to, so then we can get around the whatever you want, who cares what it's called.
Sure.
Right? Okay. So the problem of how we govern it is hard. The more we do research, the less easy it will look. The more complicated the environmental effects will look. The side effects are going to be harder to manage.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about?
I'm talking about this possibility that has become to be called geoengineering. The possibility that as a way to partially counter the warming that we're going to see from carbon dioxide, we would deliberately put reflective aerosols of various kinds, sulfates or alumina, not aluminum, alumina, difference, in the stratosphere.
Yes.
Nobody is doing this that I have any evidence of. I mean, of course, people might be, but I don't have any evidence of it, and I'd be personally stunned because of my understanding of the way lies do and don't work inside governments. But we can talk about that. But my understanding is that nobody's doing this, but people, including me, are looking at the risks and benefits of doing it in a research, and we're also working with people, either governments directly or people who work in various civil society organizations around the world to try and talk about how we would govern it if we ever did.
So from your knowledge, there's been no government approval or government funding or organizations that have been testing this anywhere in the world?
There's one example. So the Russians, I think for deliberate provocation, there's a Russian, what's his name? Yuri Israel. Yuri Israel and crowd flew a helicopter, and I don't know what it did. It was like a trivial, stupid thing. They did it purely for provocation. It's kind of the Russians liking to provoke business. And so they called it a test of geoengineering. It actually didn't test anything, and it was silly. But that's the one example that I know about where somebody did something and said, this is a test of geoengineering.
I have just one more.
Did something outside. I mean, we do lots of stuff inside.
Inside, but not in the atmosphere.
Yeah, but in the atmosphere, that's the only...
There's no spraying of...
I want to give you a sample, something, give some background of how I think about that. So, obviously governments lie and deceive routinely. But there are limits to how they can lie, and those limits are people's willingness to speak out. And so if you have a government lying about something which most people think they're right to lie about, then people will tend to keep the secret. But I mean, for there to be a program like you guys are talking about, a huge program, people talk about them on civilian aircraft.
That you're looking at exploring.
No, because we wouldn't. No.
No.
So the things we're talking about wouldn't make visible contrails because they'd be too high. They wouldn't use civilian aircraft because they can't fly that high. They'd be totally different. What you guys are apparently talking about with chemtrails is the idea that things that you guys look at the binoculars, right? And they look like regular aircraft, right?
Correct.
So as I understand the sort of proposed chemtrail conspiracy is that regular civilian aircraft are dumping large quantities of toxic materials to do something. I don't know what, because that's not my conspiracy theory.
Right.
But to do that would require an enormous supply chain. So you can't just do it with 6 people. You need a supply chain that modifies the aircraft, because engineers have to do that, other engineers have to sign, some company has to build it, some other company has to supply it, so it requires thousands and thousands of people to do that, okay? Thousands and thousands of people in a supply chain to do that. And I guess I have enough faith, to give you a sense of why I just think, to be honest, this is laughable, frankly, is that I have enough faith I don't have so much faith in governments, but I have faith in people. And I cannot conceive of or think of any other example in human history where that many people did something that had was obviously evil, had no purpose, wasn't authorized, and nobody told. And in the current day and age, look at all these things around the phone. It would be trivial to prove it, right? So if one of those people wanted to prove there's conspiracy, they just need to open their cell phone, take a picture of one of those canisters or an engineering document, get it on the web, and we're done.
They're all over the web.
Yeah, they are.
So nobody has
and
ever...
whistleblowers.
Just to finish.
Yep.
So I've corresponded with lots of chemtrails people.
Right.
Nobody has ever sent me anything other than pictures of things in the sky that look exactly like normal contrails, and by the way, look like normal contrails from textbooks in the 50s.
Right.
Or they've sent me this one thing about this alumina measurement in some Northern California site, which had appeared to be a measurement not of the water, but included some of the soil. And since that's one of the most common elements of the Earth's crust, it tells me nothing scientifically.
So
this is not a proof, it's not true.
Right.
But I'm just telling you what people have told me. If one person ever sent me a serious-looking engineering document, I would go, wow. And nobody's ever sent
maybe we can
such
have
a thing.
some fun.
Yeah.
Maybe as allies.
But I do think that.
present
But do you
to
see
you.
why so that's the way I think about it. It's not because I just trust what government says. It's
Yeah.
because I trust that people will blow the whistle.
Sure.
And I can't think of any example that's analogous. I mean, I guess you might want to say Nazi Holocaust, but so first of all, people didn't have recording devices so often. It wasn't an open society in the same way. I guess I can't think of any example in an open society.
Manhattan Project?
Well, how's that an example of the same thing?
They took 40,000 plus people to create the bomb, and it was
Yes, I know, and some of my friends did.
Totally secret.
Actually, if it wasn't, so first of all, it wasn't very secret.
Well,
In fact,
to the public.
Well, let's just go down there.
Well, it was before I was born.
Okay,
What
so
about Brexit being
hold
used in
on, but let's actually talk this through.
Okay.
The existence of the project was not secret. Congress knew, many people. The spies got out even during the war. So both Fuchs and the spy who revealed the shape of the explosive lenses, those all happened during '44. So it was it's a very good example, because the other thing I believe is that people do a shitty job keeping secrets in the real world. I mean, you guys can believe what you want, but in this world that I live in, nobody keeps secrets very well. And so in the Manhattan Project, the fact is they couldn't even keep a secret from the Russians during the war, we now know.
Well, none of us here think chemtrails is a secret.
Okay, but
Do you
there's
think
no...
it's a secret?
It's pretty
Yeah.
wide open.
So-
Like,
Typically, though, just make a comment and then one last.
Yeah.
Just when any form of.
And actually, Scott, say one more really crucial
Yeah,
thing.
sure.
Crucial
Yeah.
thing is that obviously we may now have different views about whether the Manhattan Project made sense or what we think about nuclear weapons. But at the time, the people at Los Alamos, the U.S. was in a war, however you think the right answer was, with the Germans and the Japanese. And there was every reason for most people to think that keeping secrets about weapons was sensible during wartime. That's really important. So most people would sort of intrinsically buy in. I mean, if you'd taken me in the middle of the war and said, we want you to work on a project, we're in the middle of a war against the Germans, I would be happy to keep that secret because it would seem sensible. Very different from if my government says to me, I'd like to mass murder my citizens. Can you keep a secret on that? People just react differently because they can't see a reason for it.
I don't think that they're probably telling their allies and subordinates that they're mass murdering people. I think it's probably a different spin that they're telling them.
Right, but
It's
with a
almost
technical
like-
thing, if once people have got the details of the project, you can't, I mean, secrets like that are essentially impossible to keep, especially over long times. I mean, I guess give me examples of
Area
where...
51, I don't know.
I look at things
Yeah.
such as, technology, let's just not talk about engineering, just
Yeah.
regular technology, let's look at all the cell phones around us, things come out. I'm going to use the car for an example first.
Yeah.
The cars come out, safety comes after. There's an invention of some form of technology, the safety aspects always come after. So seatbelts weren't in the cars when they were developed.
Totally
They
agree.
came.
Yeah.
So cell phones, when they came out, the electromagnetic radiation that comes off these things wasn't really studied, and we couldn't because they just came out. Now studies are coming out on the impact of these things and radiation that is around us and helping us. And there's studies all over the place that I could show you, which you probably already know of, that shows that these things are actually quite dangerous for us. So those are two examples of, let's just talk about innovative
Understood. So,
research products or services that come out, and the safety comes after. So when regular men and women start looking intuitively at the sky and see there's something different, and there's talks about some form of project or research based on the spraying of aluminum barium destruction and who knows what else. I'm not the expert there. And then samples are taken where of soil and water where the levels are astronomically out of the roof. So, for example, I do have one from the movie, I'm sure we could find much more, where the aluminum in Arizona, July 7, 2007, was 20,000 parts per million of aluminum in the soil versus the standard, which is, what, 2 parts per million. So,
No, that just is wrong. I mean,
That's
just
wrong.
go consult a geology textbook. Just go to somebody. Like, I don't expect you to believe me because you think I'm somehow involved, but just go.
No,
to,
no, no,
let me-
we
let me-
don't-
let me-
we don't
let me
think you're
speak.
involved.
Just go to a
We're just
regular
curious.
geology textbook.
right?
Aluminum is one of the most common elements in Earth's crust. It's not 2 ppm. This is just like it's just fact. It's just nonsense. I'm sorry, but
Look, that's fine.
if you
So
just
no
go to
matter-
regular
I mean,
if
we
you go to
wanna
regular
learn.
if you go to regular soil anywhere,
Right.
you'll find aluminum is an element. Is one of the
Right.
most common elements in Earth's crust.
So what is the average then?
I don't know offhand, but we could just look it up on Wikipedia or you go. ask-
okay.
yeah.
And let's
Okay.
talk.
But it
let's
sure
just
isn't
come
2
back to
ppm. It's way higher than
One
that.
thing to
Right.
know
Yeah.
about when stats are given
Yeah.
at one site, and we discuss ideas such as averages. Averages would be the average amount of aluminum in the soil would be averaged over the world or in North America or something like that. And so when I go to my backyard or the raised bed I just made and I take the test as proof and compare it against an average, I've taken one spot and taken all. It's like
it was
saying
site-based, but I'd have to research it more. But my biggest question of all that was,
Come on in.
is the environmental sciences team here looking at the soil samples of
So
aluminum?
I'm not personally because I don't work on soil samples,
Okay.
but there are lots of people who do routine monitoring of
Oh.
atmospheric dust and they publish it, and of soils and they publish it. And indeed, on this geoengineering discussion group, which some of you guys may be on, Ken Caldera put up a bunch of those papers recently. He just found them in 20 minutes. None of them show anything. So again, that's why
Okay.
my view is, I'll tell you why I'm not working on it. I work on the problems that I think are really harming people. Air pollution kills more than 1%. Air pollution kills something like 50,000 people in North America every year. That's real. It's hard data. So from my point of view, I want to work on problems that I think really are real.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a single piece of evidence suggesting to me there's anything here. There's certainly any there. If somebody showed me really convincing evidence, I'd happily stop other stuff I'm doing and make a research program in that, because I just like doing research on stuff that matters.
Great.
Can I call out the blatantly obvious here?
Yeah.
That's right, everyone. What it seems like we're doing here is we're attempting to convince you that chemtrails exist. And that's what I'm seeing.
Yes, and
Yeah, but I would
I don't
like-
want to go down that road.
Yeah, maybe
because
we
I
should,
believe
like-
he's not going to.
What I would like to, there's two questions I have. Number
Yeah.
one is, what is your expertise? And the second question is, if we do convince you that chemtrails do exist, what is the benefit to us to spend the next hour and a half or hour now doing this?
So if you, good,
What is the benefit
good
for us
questions.
to
Good
put
questions.
this time and energy into making this seem very evident and real to you?
So if you really convinced me people were doing this, I'm serious, drop everything else I was doing and find a way, because I mean, if by chemtrails you mean a large conspiracy
Yes.
of government,
Yes.
I would drop everything else I was doing and risk my life to block it,
Wow.
because I believe that's the right thing to do.
Beautiful.
I haven't seen any such evidence at all. It just frankly seems to me, this is obvious, kind of strange. I'm trying to figure out why you guys believe it.
Yeah.
But I think that's the normal human thing to do. I have kids too. I've grown up working on environmental pollution,
Right.
et cetera. But I do think we now have half an hour.
Mhm.
There's a limit to how far it makes sense to go back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, maybe I feel like I just lost the thread there. You said two things. I responded to one.
No,
I
you-
apologize.
I
Yeah,
just
what's my
wanna-
expertise? Sorry. Okay.
I want to say that what you
Yeah.
just said right
Yeah.
there, from what I get, and I don't know what your connections are,
Yeah.
what your area of influence
Oh, I can tell
is,
you. Yeah.
that just having one individual who's willing to do, if you do follow
Yeah.
what you say,
Yeah.
to do what you just said, would be worth me, I can speak for myself, spending the next hour in providing
I think
evidence for you.
many people, I mean, a lot of
We
people
need a
working on this are
different
kind
way.
of
We
environmental
need a
scientists.
different way to
Yeah.
present.
And there's probably
Yeah.
a lot of data that we can bring and fill this entire table full with.
Okay.
I'd love to go on a hike with you.
We obviously
Just-
don't have the technology.
But what,
Show you.
but what
at
we
the
see,
moment.
I
And the
hike
other
a
one is
lot.
for expertise.
What will we see on a hike?
Yeah.
Can I
Like
just...
what?
that's
I mean,
a bit of
Can we
a-
just-
but
can we
no,
just hold on?
seriously,
I want
what,
to get
what,
to the second part.
what will we see?
Okay. Here I have,
Denise, can we get,
Okay.
because I want to hear it before.
Sorry,
we start going off on
yeah,
focus.
you're right.
And what
Thanks,
is-
Sam.
what is your expertise?
Thanks,
We're all
Sam.
clear.
Yeah.
What is your influence?
Well, influence
If
is
you-
harder
if you-
for me to judge, but I
if
can
you'd
tell you my
like to provide
expertise.
that,
So
yeah.
I was trained in physics, and then I switched, so physics at MIT, and then I switched to doing, about that time, doing more environmental science. And so I basically anchored at a place called Carnegie Mellon University, which has a Department of Engineering and Public Policy, which has done work on a bunch of basically public policy questions, a lot, but not all environmental, where the science matters. So we worked a lot on air pollution and climate change and some water pollution stuff and life cycle analysis and a big range of things. And we get funded by a mixture of private and government sources, like any university, and we, enormous range of stuff has got done. And I've also spent about 5 years or so back, I was a postdoc for a guy at Harvard, trying to develop instruments to figure out how to measure temperatures from space. So basically doing experimental science. So I actually on the fuel conspiracy theories on what you would call the U2. NASA has 2 ER2s, and they're used for science and other things to discover the cause of the ozone hole. And the group I was in was the prime group that actually made the instruments that proved what the cause of the ozone hole was. And so we were building instruments that fly on that to measure temperatures. And I've been here for 6 years. So, I mean, I work on a pretty wide range of energy environmental problems. On this topic, I'm involved in lots of ways. I'm happy to list them. I mean, the topic of geoengineering. I, at this point, still think there probably is no topic of chemtrails, but I'm fascinated that you guys think there is. And I'm also, frankly, disturbed. So I've had many people writing me saying that they want to kill me. We've had one person who was called Holly with enough anger that we had to call the police.
oh, sorry
Oh
to
yes.
hear that.
Oh yeah. No. We have emails
I'm
that say
very sorry
I'm
to
evil.
hear
I don't love my children. I should burn a lake of fire. We had somebody who called Holly, who was worked at a local detailing store and believed that I was a mass murderer, and so then left a message when he was drunk and aggressive enough that we actually did call the police and talk to him. So
And that's because of.
all this stuff that you.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not blaming
So
you
it's
guys, but there are
brought some
consequences to
attention.
shouting fire in a crowded room.
Yeah.
And if people keep pushing this chemtrails conspiracy, my guess is somebody, not necessarily any one of you guys, will act on it, because if it's literally true that there is a conspiracy, then it might be rational to murder somebody like me.
No.
Yeah, that's...
Yes, seriously, if you guys are serious about what you're saying, I mean, if you really thought it was true, that I was one of the kingpins of a conspiracy to kill people, and nobody believed it, it might be rational to go kill me.
No.
I'm not saying you're saying that,
Yeah.
but there will be people who listen to what you say who may act, and you have to take responsibility for that one way or the other.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, quick
Michelle
question.
had something.
Yeah.
When you say conspiracy and you say the government, why is it that the government would be covering it up? Don't you think there'd be people paying the government officials to cover it up, and they're the ones? Like an example of that before you answer. Corexit being used in the Gulf.
Yeah.
1911, Standard Oil was severed into 36 smaller companies. They're owned by the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
Let's go into the elite system here. Like, do you think that the government would cover up a conspiracy, or do you think that there'd be people above that creating conspiracies and then getting the government officials to cover that up, without them even maybe having?
I think it
as
can
much
go
knowledge?
lots of ways, but I think, and this is obviously just a real different worldview. I mean, forgetting about this topic, I don't think there are as many secrets as I think
So
you guys do.
what do
And
you
I
think
think
corrects
the
that?
reason is that I think it's extremely hard to keep effective secrets in modern democracies where governments don't easily just lock people up and kill them right away. And so what we find again and again, I remember, just to give you like an off-the-cuff example, I had one of my friends growing up, dad worked for, Canadian military, worked for NATO or something, and he said that they have all this secret document on the Soviet weapons that were secret. He said actually going to Jane's, the standard publisher of military, said Jane's all the world's ships and aircraft was basically just as good, because anything that a lot of people build, you can't keep secret. I just can't think of any example. You can do the Manhattan Project for a couple of years during the war.
You say that because
Yeah.
both my parents worked on the NATO
Yeah.
Supreme Allied headquarters
Yeah.
in Shape in Belgium.
Yeah.
Believe me, they can keep secrets.
Could be.
It's
but
easier. It's harder.
but it
and
hasn't
more
been-
life-threatening
hasn't been
to
my
uncover the
experience.
secrets than keep the secrets. So
could be we're coming, but that may be the difference between what we're saying. Yep.
I would just like to present maybe a different way of looking at that
Yeah.
as far as secret being kept.
Yeah.
If I have a secret and I tell Nicholas one word, and I tell Paul one word,
Yep.
and I tell Sam one word, and I tell Justin one word, and I tell the gentleman on the end, I forget your name, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Sure.
one word. Does he know he's part of a secret? Does Sam know he's part of the secret? Does Paul know he's part of the secret? Does Nicholas know he's part of the secret? When we're talking about government organizations and agencies that are each separately formed, you have employees, you have service people within one organization that do not know. I've worked in big corporations. I know my department had no idea what the other department was doing. So, just for the sake of argument and perception, could there not be a secret or a series of secret, like you say, where an employee or a person has no idea that they're part of that secret?
I think that's actually a great question. Let's just pursue that for a little bit to try and put some flesh around if this was happening, what it would mean. So let's assume for a second, obviously I don't believe this is true, but let's assume that there really was large-scale spraying of like significant quantities of materials for civilian aircraft. Then again, somebody has to manufacture the thing that holds the materials. It's not built into the aircraft. Somebody has to load stuff onto it. There's got to be a whole supply chain to do that, right? And so yes, in principle, one could construct a conspiracy where one group of people built all that without knowing what they were building, just as you said, and some much smaller group of people knew why they were doing it. But if the one group of people who was building it didn't know it was bad, they'd have no reason not to tell. And so again, it would be publicly contracted. So the point is, governments in the modern world, it's very hard for them to make big contracts without, just let me finish, without a huge paper trail. And I work with aircraft a lot. I mean, if you wanted to modify that many civilian aircraft, you have to deal with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And especially if they don't think it's a secret, going on your theory, because they're deceived, right? They would have no reason not to just hand over the blueprints. And so again, why aren't they there?
well, the patents are there.
This is more done by the military than it is by private civilians and the military-industrial complex.
So there's different theories. I mean, how many of you think this is, because mostly I've heard chemtrails people say this comes from civilian aircraft.
Well, the great way for the
military.
military to hide it would be use civilian aircraft or anything else.
There's
Partnership with
Let Michelle, let's let Michelle speak.
It's very easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
People can keep secrets if they like.
I'm just
Stay.
wondering on this topic, if people could just tell me why the military
Yeah, good question.
industrial complex or a civilian
What's the purpose
complex.
here?
Why we're doing chemtrails. So I have...
I have
Yeah, Michelle, this is you.
In a big survey that we did, and I asked people basically about their beliefs in it. There's all kinds of different ideas that come out, but one of them is the primary one is to call the population, and we've seen that a lot. So I'm just wondering if, I mean, for me to even start this conversation, I need to understand why someone would be putting devices on an airplane that would be spreading something to what end?
Yeah,
and so then we can have a conversation.
That's such
from
a
that
fair
point.
question,
Weather
Ashley.
modification.
Okay,
Yeah.
so weather modification. Are there any other?
Yeah, I think we need to, we are way over here, and we need to bring
Okay.
this conversation over here. First of all, locally, we do cloud seeding. I don't think does anyone in
That's
this
no-
room
yeah.
know what that's about?
Well, that's
So
nothing new.
Locally, we do cloud seeding where it's for a hail suppression program.
Mhm.
And the company that does it is Weather Modification, Inc. And they do it because they get paid by the farmers through the insurance companies to suppress the hail so that it doesn't ruin the crop.
Yep.
This is well known. Everybody
Yeah.
knows this.
I
Check
don't
mark.
think David and I would.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
public,
Okay.
know it
well
happens,
understood,
it happens in
huge.
Texas,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
happens
yeah.
many places.
Exactly.
So why on a civilian aircraft?
Well, I'm not claiming it is necessarily a civilian aircraft, but I can tell you the money to fund it would come from the military if it was a civilian.
Okay, but what does the Canadian, American, UK military, these big militaries gain from currently, right now, spreading something in the
It was
atmosphere?
actually something David Keith said at one of the, I think it was a TED interview, where he basically said, what if a private company, or what if it was a country like, say, China or Russia that decided they were going to start controlling the weather? And who gets to decide what the temperature is on the global scale?
So are we talking
Who gets
about
to determine?
climate or weather?
Climate.
Okay, so
Because-
if you were going to control the
Because-
climate,
Yeah,
but
and-
all the pictures I've seen, so this is just some really basic science, all the pictures I've seen are aircraft in what's called the troposphere because they have
Yes.
contrails.
Yes.
They wouldn't be useful for
But-
doing.
But
let me-
the
let me
question
just- let me just-
the question was,
Okay.
why are they doing this?
Okay.
And the concept
Got it.
is that, is there anyone in this room that isn't trying to do good right now? Not one of us here has bad intentions. I don't think anyone has bad intentions, but the road to hell is paved with bad intentions.
So-
Good intentions. Yeah, I understand, yeah.
I
But-
appreciate what you said.
Yeah.
But I cannot reflect back to you the reason why you believe they're doing it. You said.
I believe the Canadian government, the military government are trying to help us.
Okay.
They're trying to
But by
do
weather,
us
for
good.
weather control.
Well,
So what are they helping us
What are
to
they
do?
trying to do?
What are they
I
trying
believe
to
they
do?
think that they're helping us. I do believe that.
I understand, but-
By doing what?
But by doing, with what goal?
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
raising the questions because what I do know is that there are new levels of aluminum that we're finding. Actually, it's interesting. He's a naturopath because
Finding it in the
that
water.
we're finding it in the water, the soil, everything. And my daughter, who's 3, is being exposed to this. I'm trying to figure out why. Of course, there's a lot of talk about vaccines and drugs and all of the other ideas.
Excuse me, is there water?
What I do know for sure.
Yeah, right by the bathrooms in front, yeah.
Monsanto is developing these aluminum-resistant seeds. Why are they doing that? Well, does anybody see how that ties together?
Of course.
That Monsanto was the original company that was spraying during the wars as a weapon to use against the enemy. And they actually did use it in Canada at CFB Cagetown. And the vets right now are being compensated
This
for being
is
sprayed.
245T or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So when we talk about private company and military, well, technically Monsanto is a private company, but technically they've been paid by the military to have all this technology and have all of this knowledge which they have used. So, it's not that I'm trying to say this is only civilian aircraft or it's all the government's fault. It's a collaboration.
Understood, but so wait. Okay.
Simone, you said when I reiterated why would a government complex invest this type of money to perform this, and you said who cares? And so I just was wondering if you could expand on that.
Sure, because I can have all types of conspiracies about what's going on, whether it's climate change, depopulation, whether it's they're keeping secrets, whether it's HARP. the bottom line is there's something happening. We're seeing things, we're observing things that have changed. We're seeing health impacts, and we are not in the know, including, I'm assuming, both of you.
Yes.
Who have no clue what we're talking about, which is very interesting to me.
No. This being said, both of us have seen the same things and have done a substantial amount of reading on this and have spent a lot of time thinking about it. So I don't think it's fair to say we don't know.
No, but we don't know. I mean, to the extent that if one assumes there is something, if there's something happening, we don't know about it.
We've heard chemtrails, I don't know what that is. So the aerosol spraying and the conference of the American Association of Advanced Science that David was talking about and looking at risks of some form of spraying, which allegedly is not happening right now. When I say who cares, what I mean is it doesn't matter exactly what it is, it's that we don't know and it's happening over our heads without our consent. That's my...
So what are, maybe could we have some other answers to Ashley's question? Like what, so assuming this thing is happening, one of the ways I try and think it through is I want to have a story in my head, like why are they doing that?
Right.
And does the story fit together? Like I've heard, just a sec, I've heard some people say they want to have some mass killing of the population. I think, if I was going to do that, why would I spray poisons from aircraft? I just put it in water or food. So I'm just trying to sort of understand the sequence of thinking that's going on here. So what's a purpose?
It's really good to interject at this point, going back to Dr. Judy Wood.
Okay.
She said, going back to 9/11, everybody come out and says, it's an inside job, it's this and this and this. And says, before you can determine why, which is what we're talking about, why would people do this? That's the very last question you ask, not the first. The first thing to do is to discover the evidence, to discover what happened, and then how it's being done. Then you can perhaps find out who is doing it, and then why. So here we're trying to figure out why, which is retarded, because this is the last question. Until you know what's going on, if you're not convinced that it's actually happening, who cares why they may be doing it? It's irrelevant at this point. First of all, you have to establish what is happening. Where's the evidence? That's what you said. You want to see it. And so once that's done, okay, then how are they doing it? Then who is doing it? Then you ask why. Talking about why they're doing it is ridiculous, because we don't know who's doing it.
I feel like we're building a bridge from two directions, which is fine. So we have a lot of uncertainty here. Maybe some of you are more certain, but we're grappling with something you don't understand very well. And so I think it's both useful to try and figure out what evidence we really have, and try and figure out sort of essentially theories that fit the evidence together. And those theories have to involve somebody wanting to do something for some purpose. And then you have to think logically, what's the chain of them doing that? So if the government, so when I think about what you said, if the government was trying to modify the weather to our benefit, why would they do it in a way that had a lot of lies? Because the people making the decision would know that once those lies were exposed, they would fall instantly, right? The government would be brought down, would collapse. What would be in it for them?
There's a long history.
So I think about people's self-interest. I try to think, how does it work?
Naturopaths wanted to speak.
I would have to. I'm just going to add my perspective. I read conspiracy theories and so forth because I find them entertaining, and some of them there may be something to them. But I always, in my mind, have this divorce between what people are talking about and my lived experience.
Yeah.
So clinically, I see certain things, and then you can theorize. Oh, this is because of this, and this is because of that. But at the end, all the theorization is just you talking, unless you've got various sources of data and so forth. Clinically, right now, I see lots of I see a great deal of non-specific pathologies. People come in, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Their body is not functioning as well as it used to. Their body is not performing as well. They're exhausted, they're fatigued, and so forth. There's a lot of non-specific illnesses that are not, one might call, pathologies. There's not, like, you can go and this person dies and you get an autopsy and the tissue changes aren't there, but things just aren't functioning as well as they perhaps might have. So that is my lived experience right now, is living and treating these people and helping them get better and so forth. I am seeing a greater incidence of this as time goes on. I've only been in practice for 2 years. However, I do have people, mentors and so forth, who've been in practice 30, 40 and so forth years, where this has been an increasing pattern. They're like, oh, Paul, I never used to see things like that. I used to give kids a remedy and they'd get better like instantly, and now it's just years and years of work to get them to the point where they're actually functional, healthfully and so forth. So this is the lived experience, and I suppose the experience that I'm living vicariously through right this minute. Theoretically, and I'm thinking a lot of other people, because I do this for a living, I have a lot more exposure to this. Theoretically, I know a lot of people are in their own lives, having these same symptoms and so forth, and coming through to these same answers, or coming through to these, something weird is happening. I mean, that's the basic theme underlying most of these theories and so forth. What the fuck is going on? Something weird is happening, and then there comes the observations and the jumping and the compounding of these into theories and so forth. When we actually bring it down to lived experience, I mean, I have no idea what's going on, or whether or not chemtrails, there's any chemical constituents to them or so forth, whether there's a deliberate action to it, or who's doing it or anything. But I do see these clinical outcomes increasing, these clinical entities increasing in frequency, and I don't know what's doing it. I see people peeing out plutonium, and I see people peeing out metals and so forth, and I don't know where they're coming from.
Can I ask you about so I'm going to reflect what I heard and then ask a question on it. So I heard you say, as a practitioner, you're seeing a change, and over terms, your mentors have also seen a change.
Yes, so and this is somewhat vicarious, because my mentors have seen this over the 30 years, because I haven't been alive that long.
I'll give you that. But I also hear you saying, which I'd like to tease out from the debate that's often put out into the media, which is ideas of barium, strontium, and alumina. I hear you listing chemicals that don't fall in that, and actually fall in something that's very clearly not hidden, and that would be nuclear testing. And so I concur, and there are studies that show increasing levels of different chemicals in fat cells in adults, but they're often attributed to live.
And I'm not using this as a support or a demolishing of the chemtrail thing. I am simply, in my mind, I'm just pointing out that this is probably where all of this stuff comes from, and after that, there are elaborations that grow out of this. Because it is very difficult to resort to lived experience and to stay there, and to keep those two things clear, because that is, our brains don't work that way. When we think about something as true, even if we have no direct experience of it, it's exactly the same as if we had a lived experience of that. But lived experience-wise, I have to just keep that very clear for my own sanity and so forth. So that's one thing I would like to point out in this area.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd offer one comment, which is that you're a naturopath, and naturopaths are there precisely, I think, to deal with people who have non-specific illnesses that medical people don't treat very well. So it's not surprising you see a lot of them.
No, I don't suppose I would not say that.
I mean, it's not fair, but I think that's, so in my experience of people, my friends who talk about naturopaths, that's why they go to naturopaths, is precisely that reason. So the fact you see them, it's the same sense as I see, when I teach undergrads, I see the undergrads who have different sorts of problems, because they're the ones who come to my office. And it's sort of, because that's what my office is for.
Generalize in that sense.
That is unfortunate, and it is unfortunate that we just don't have the resources to draw statistical conclusions at this time to do that, because we just don't have the money or the resources to do that.
Understood. But generally, as you say, I'd like to get, if anybody else wants to offer theories about why, taking what Jerry said, that, in some sense you want to do both things. You want to understand what the data is, but you also need to put together theories of the data. Why would people be doing this?
I have a theory.
Yeah.
And you can call me crazy. People do
I won't do that.
from time to time call me crazy. The brain is one of the least understood organs in the body.
That's for sure true.
Okay. There are chemicals and impulses and synaptic transfers with specific chemicals that operate within the brain. We also have a very sure, just about proof of the sound frequency aspect of our bodies and of our existence, to the effect of, well, matter vibrates, creates a sound, and different frequencies have different effects, or different sound waves within an audible range of frequency or inaudible range of frequency have effect on people. So I would propose a theory that, based on a compartmentalized idea of government secrecy, okay?
Yeah.
Where the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. That there could be military factions or alliances built globally that have an idea that minds can be controlled and that the chemical reactions within the brain that govern free will are very easily manipulated through chemicals introduced into the body. We are like fish within a fishbowl. I have a very porous, membranous structure to my body. So if I go stick my hands in a bowl of nicotine for an hour, I'll be essentially a smoker that's been smoking for an hour through my hands. I can breathe in those things. I can absorb them through my skin. That's just the chemical side of it. When it comes to the sound frequency, I'm going to tie this in a second. The sound frequency doesn't necessarily affect my hearing. It can affect the actual matter, structural integrity of my system. All my parts working together through, yes, DNA, through the genetic coding, through certain chemical regulations within my brain being governed by the sovereign construction of my body from the Creator. I believe I'm created by a Creator. So, would it be so far out there to suggest that the chemicals that may or may not be introduced through spraying, also other means, there are chemicals, say for example aspartame, that are introduced into our diet. Federal Drug Agency or Administration, the FDA, sending approval on things over a course of time as a compartmentalized government agency trying to do good. These chemicals are being introduced, from my perception, in combination with projects such as HARP, such as GWEN. There are ELF, UHF, and EMF frequencies that have very different and varied effects on the human composition. All it takes to induce an emotion in a rat in a lab is to introduce a chemical specifically into the brain or to inhibit the production of another chemical. That's why pharmaceuticals are so successful, because it takes away the actual regeneration or productive ability of the brain to do those chemicals on its own. So to me, in my mind, this is what the purpose is to take a population who's already suppressed, who's already taken out of their free will choices as sovereign men and women, and to keep them in a very easily controlled state, to keep them in a governed state, to keep them in a state where they are vulnerable, they need protection, and where they believe that to be true. And in a place where they cannot govern themselves, where they cannot make choices for themselves, where their sense of awareness and perception, GWEN, GW, all in capitals, was established in the early 1900s, mid-1900s, and it's an ELF construct of frequency. Now, I'm not a frequency expert. I'm not a mathematician. I know someone who is, and scalar wave technology is something that was done by Tesla. Tesla's come up a few times, but there's other guys that have done it. As far as I know, from what I've researched, I wasn't there standing there to see these scientists taken aside and say, come with us, by the military. But as far as I know, that frequency technology has been kind of not very public. It's not public at all. So I would say that it's a grand symphony or orchestration of different components that, as a public, we sit back and we say, you know, this chemical in my diet, or this chemical, if we can even isolate the chemical, as a naturopath doctor or as an allopathic doctor can maybe do, but as a person, you know, I have symptoms, I have things, or
as a woman
Yeah.
or as a person, I could be going through something where I don't understand what it is. So then I start going organic. Then I start detoxifying. Then I start refining my diet, refining the water I drink, really trying to make my body as organic as possible. How organic can I be when I'm a fish in a fishbowl, and as soon as a chemical is introduced into the water that I breathe as a fish, the entire fishbowl and the entire aquarium is affected?
Yeah.
How can I do that? That's my free will. To be clean, to be organic, to be as capable and conscionable over my free will and self-governance as I can be. If there is a compartmentalized, look, big picture system of mind control, by mind control I mean keeping people dumbed down.
Sedated.
Dumbed down. Keeping them in a place where they can't objectively look at this and say, wow, this is a blue sweater. It's not like that blue, it's just blue.
Yeah.
I have no way of proving this. I have no way of proving it. This is my mom.
Yeah.
I see the chemtrails, David. I see them over my house. Every time they sprayed heavy, I had to take my mom to the hospital for a bronchitis. I can't prove it, but it's emotional for me.
I just wanted to add, we're looking for theories.
We see causality.
I agree with what she's saying, but just for me personally, that I like to tell people to make it really simple, is that we underestimate the power of corporations and their money. And I think Monsanto, I think Monsanto is a great example of that, where they can manipulate the earth and the soil and the water, so for their agenda to sell their seeds. Just real simple.
Understood.
Yeah.
You control the food, you control the people. They're transmuted seeds that they introduce into domestic populations, like have taken over the corn in South America, and it just starts spreading, and then you have to buy their corn. It's
a different type of communism. It's like corporate communism.
It's called corporatism.
Yeah.
And I agree exactly with what she said there, and I'm really going to start wearing my tin hat that I need.
I left mine at home. I left it at home. I had my cowboy hat done up and everything.
New tin cowboy hats for Calgarians. I don't say that. I believe exactly what you said. I believe that HARP can be used to actually transmit and activate the chemicals that are in our bodies and produce all kinds of reactions that are magnified 1,000,000 times. So you don't need these high doses. So if you have very small doses that are ingested, and then you can magnify it through the heart system, which we don't even know. I mean, it's just possible. It's more than everything's possible.
I'd like to have her comment on this, because I think there's one useful thing to say. But Rob, do you want to say something first? Is it Rob?
It's just a comment I have. I've worked for the last 6 years to remove my dependency from this corporate system that we have developed, because I believe that it's not natural, and so we've actually went back to the land, and we're trying to, I believe in God. I believe the Creator provided this earth for us, and so I'm trying to figure out how I can go back and learn how to live in harmony with nature, and how nature can provide for me and my family, without being dependent on the corporate power grid and the food grid and fuel and all that kind of stuff. And so we've taken huge steps to do that. But the reality that I find is that I still have a relationship with everybody else, and I believe my life is all about my relationships. My relationship with my Creator, with myself, with you fine folks, and with my environment and my food. And for me, if I find other people are spraying things around without my consent, then I have a right to say, you know what, I don't consent to that. I believe that rather than trying to use our technology to fix the problem, I believe that we should look at within ourselves to find out that maybe there's something within ourselves that needs to be examined or evaluated to see what we're doing, because I think what's happening out here is a reflection of what's happening in here. And so what we're trying to do, like my family, is change the way we live, change the way we provide for ourselves and take a look at the reasons why we have been living the way we are, and perhaps that evaluation will show that this brick and mortar utopia that we built, or that we think is a utopia, may not necessarily be sustainable or even healthy for us. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go back to the land, and it bothers me that chemicals or industrial pollutants, and I'm not saying that there's chemtrails or anything like that. I don't know, but I do know that there are pollutants in the environment that do affect our ability to be healthy and live in harmony with nature. And that's all I want to say. And I appreciate and I honor what everybody here is trying to do, because I think we're all going towards the same goal and path. I notice that there's some communication issues that we need to work out, but I think we're all interested in the same result. And I am very grateful that I had the opportunity to participate in this, because I live like 4.5 hours away, so it just happened to be that I was in town when this happened. I'm very grateful to be here and to participate, and I encourage you guys to continue a dialogue, so hopefully that we can come down to some sort of resolution that would be of satisfaction to everybody, and we can come down to the root of this. And thank you for the opportunity.
Maybe I'll offer a couple thoughts. So first of all, I completely agree. I mean, there's no question that it's not utopia. There's no question that there's lots of industrial pollution. And there's no question there's some kind of connection between the way we live and the way we think, and that there are many ways in which the way we're doing it are unsustainable and are also not making people happy. So I completely agree with those comments. I want to try and offer some of my thoughts that may or may not be useful to you folks, but about how I, as a sort of, inject science into my thinking. So the comments about the way people's minds might be controlled and so on. So first of all, it's absolutely true that lots of, especially very specific, complicated, big organic compounds, these are things with lots of atoms, complicated things, can affect the way our brains work. No doubt about it whatsoever, and we're learning more about it all the time. And there's no question that people might seek to do that for purposes that were good or ill. That's the way people are. People have instincts that are good or ill. But I want to pick up, I'm not trying to just pounce on something, but I want to pick up something because I think, to me, and that may be just the world I live in, I see people as complicated, mixed emotions and mixed motives, and they're certainly good and ill and so on. But I do believe there's a sort of physical reality out there. That's, I guess, what you believe if you're a scientist. And I think that that's been built up over thousands of years of people trying to not fool themselves. To me, that's the essence of what science is. And so there's some things we're pretty sure about. I mean, sure about the level of, thousands of people working for the whole century in this kind of amazingly open process, which is called science, or actually many centuries, and throughout many cultures and so on. And so, for example, it is just a fact of nature, as much as it's a fact of nature that things fall, that a ELF radiation, these very long, low-frequency radio waves, cannot alter the way a particular itty-bitty chemical works in your blood. That's not to say people couldn't put chemicals in your blood, do mind control. They sure could. I'm not saying they are, but there's no question that's possible. I'm just talking about what's possible and what's not. There's no question that you can heat people up with low-frequency radiation. It's basically like a big microwave. But for reasons that are really basic physics, go back to Maxwell's equations, so 1890s physics, that, I mean, if it's wrong, our whole understanding of the universe is wrong. Maybe it is, but this is a deep shared understanding. You just can't take one of these very, very big radio waves, and from like really undergraduate physics, there's nothing you can do to a small chemical. There's no way to kind of specifically turn on a chemical. And from my point of view, that's just a fact. So when I sort of sort this out, I think to myself,
yes, you're certainly right. The governments might be, well, so first of all, do governments want their citizens to be passive? Oh, yeah. Are there incentives in the way our government system is put together that connect up the complicated linkage between corporations and various citizens groups and the government? Are there ways in which it's to the advantage of lots of people to have people passive? Of course. Are there ways that they achieve that? Yes, I'd say. I don't think it's a big conspiracy, but to me, television and radio and lots of the way we hold political debates are basically ways to avoid talking about the big issues in our society, and so they're very effective ways to keep people passive. So I guess one thing that I just I'll start rambling for a second. When I hear these things, one of the things I do is I don't regard any motive of people as impossible. People have an unbelievable range of motives, including enormously wonderful altruistic motives and enormously evil motives. So there's nothing you can tell me about some corporate or government person that I'll say is impossible, because I believe essentially any motives are possible. But there are things I hear that I just believe are impossible by physics. So it can't be that you could put a chemical in somebody and expose them to some very low frequency radio wave and somehow turn it on or affect it. As far as I know, that can't be any more than it can't be that people can teleport or walk through walls. For what it's worth, that's so that's where we're coming from a different place. I don't put the yet in. Sure. I truly believe in the basics of physics as describing the world right from the experiments we have, and that means that some sorts of thing, like not conserving energy, are just not possible. Mm-hmm. You guys
with
are free.
Known physics. You'd have to say you're speaking from what is known physics.
Of course,
right?
but there's
Which
ways.
is always being discovered.
Well, there's actually been really no changes to these fundamental things for 100 years or so. There aren't any big new discoveries in the sort of core bits of physics I'm talking about. And we have very sensitive checks that would be sensitive to if there was any new physics.
Welcome to my world soon.
Yeah. So, obviously, but the bottom line is, yes, I'm talking about as we know it now.
Right.
But it's important to say, unlike the way we know some things, these things, there are only a very small number of core physical laws. So the laws that basically define electromagnetism, there's 4 equations. There haven't been any more invented for 100 years. They work. They allow us to predict all sorts of incredible things, from the way these radios work to the way the lightning storms on Jupiter work. It's all the same 4 equations. Maybe you will find a 5th, but there's actually ways in which we can do internal tests that make it very, very unlikely there is any. So that's how physicists view the world. Maybe it sounds naive, but that's how I view it. And
it sounds like an academic's point of view. Yeah.
It sounds like a perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, everything's a perspective. I don't think it's particularly academic. Lots of science isn't academic. Indeed, a lot of it hasn't been and isn't. I'm a deep, what I call realist and scientist. It's a scientific perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate you expressing that.
And that's, you're absolutely true. A lot of what you said, so again, I sort stuff in sort of, like, what you said about putting your hands and stuff, and that was actually beautifully described. You're right, your bodies are permeable to stuff, and it's true that we don't understand the implications of all these chemicals. But to circle back to chemtrails, if I wanted to, again, I try and think with like hypothesis, I try and put together a chain in my mind and say, could this make sense? If I wanted to do something to do with mind control, I know from the science and physics I know that has to be big, complicated molecules. It's very rare that single elements do anything, basically because they're in nature. So there's no way that alumina is going to be an important mind control agent because it's so common on the Earth's crust. So humans would have evolved around it.
But you're looking at all these things on an individual basis.
Well, I don't know any other way to look at them.
Well, mix in hard, mix in all these other.
Okay, but let me just continue how I think about it. Let me just finish. Let me just finish. So, let me just turn this around. If you hired me and said, okay, I'm going to direct a program doing mind control, I would think about the complicated pharmacochemistry of the way people's brains work. I would engage a bunch of brain scientists to try and figure out the very specific chemicals that can influence emotions and behavior. And from really basic physics, it's clear all those things are going to be very specific big chemicals, because the way the brain works is the way proteins work is they've got funny shapes, they fit together. That's how biology works. And so you need these funny shaped big things to work as neurotransmitters or whatever it is. And so it's pretty certain off the bat that no single regular chemical element that's a common constituent in Earth's crust is going to be what you want. And also, all these big funny things are denatured by heat. Right? Proteins are cooked. That's what cooking is. So you need a way to introduce them to people's bodies. Again, just suppose that I'm hired to do mind control. The last thing I do is spray huge quantities of stuff from airplanes. This is where I just think part of this, from my point of view, just finish, just tell you how I think, just doesn't add up in any way that makes sense. I'm not saying, this. Remember, so far I've just talked about science. I'm not saying anything about motives. I'm saying, let's suppose you want to do mind control. I would look to getting it, you got to get it into a route that gets it to people. You can't heat it up. It's going to be some complicated, organic chemical, because that's what our brains are made out of, and that's what they respond to. And you got to find a way to get it in. I would do it through food or water. But I wouldn't do it by spraying alumina from aircraft.
Directly affects through the water cycle.
Sure, I'm just trying to say what's the easiest way. So in principle, I could spray the proteins from aircraft, but stuff eats proteins, they rot, you've got to have huge numbers of them. You want to deliver little amounts to people, you want to do it.
That's because you don't know, perhaps, and we all don't know the mechanisms that might be in place and able to do this. It's just that it could be an unknown science. I mean, that's happened before in the world.
Well, actually, that's science. So there isn't much unknown science, and here's why. Science is inherently a collaborative enterprise. It's inherently an enterprise made of people who are skeptics and who don't obey instructions. That's the way most scientists actually are. And so some of the people who I most respect, people who were involved in building nuclear weapons, my teachers, they communicated back and forth across the Cold War on both sides, risking their lives to do it, and it's part of the reason we didn't have a hot war. They didn't do what they were told. Mm-hmm. And so Russian people like Sakharov risked their lives, and in fact, were tortured to try and communicate back and forth against their leaders' wishes, to be clear. That's the science community I'm proud of. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do what it's told. And that's why when people tell me there's a big conspiracy of scientists, I think, what? It's the last people I'm going to have do conspiracies. Mm-hmm. And science only works, each person only sees a little bit. And so it's very hard to have some big piece of science that's walled off. Again and again we hear, the military has this amazing science, and it's not true. Mm-hmm. So you can read about it, but I'm telling you my world. My world is that understood, but my world is that the military sometimes tries and walls off little projects like to build better electronics, and they find that they just don't have the money to keep up with Apple and RIM and the big developers, because it's all a connected world.
That's what I mean about when you were saying, private companies as opposed to the military. I think that's where that marriage is that, these guys will develop it for you and go from there.
But they can't develop, they can develop applications. So if you want me to build, a robot that flies around in Iraq and shoots people with bombs, that's easy. That's applying known hardware in a way we know how to do. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but we know how to do it.
It's applying military science to commercialized science.
Whatever, it's all, there's only one science, there's applications.
But you can take commercialized things and apply military science.
Of course. So well, I'm not sure what you mean by military science. Military doesn't really do science.
Entity. Those aren't interlooped. Don't tell me they are. Military and commercial are interlooped sciences. We're talking they do things behind the curtains of each other. Like military scientists are not working with civilian scientists on the same projects.
This simply isn't the world I live in. So I don't know any such.
The world I grew up in.
Understood, but it's not the world.
Military bases. And
understood.
Stuff like that.
So I've also spent
separated it is.
So that's not. I've also spent a fair amount of time at military bases, and I have lots of people who work in the policy world work on both sides. And my experience is it's a pretty socially connected network with people working together, and that's exactly why people don't keep secrets very well.
That is the most untrue statement I've heard here.
Fair enough.
I'm
just telling you my personal experience.
What's going on here is he's given his perspective on what he's experienced, and it's possible that we have experienced something different. Now, I just want to ask you, is it possible that there might be something outside of what you've experienced?
Of course. I mean, there are some little secrets they keep. So let me tell you the kind of secrets they can effectively keep. All the actual command and control secrets they can try to keep. So the issue is what's the plan for attacking this village versus that village in Afghanistan? Those operational things, they keep those secrets. If the issue is we're going to have a limited number of helicopters that are radar black, that then we use the 1-1 to try and get Osama, you can keep that secret for a little while, but it wasn't really even a secret because in fact there was a bunch of stuff in Aviation Week 3 years ago.
What about the depleted uranium being used in?
What's the secret? It's commercial.
It is a secret though, because it's not known that that's being used by civil, like our cultural, like, you know, society does not know that your depleted uranium, which is basically a nuclear bomb without a mushroom cloud, is being used.
It's not a nuclear bomb. It's just depleted uranium.
Okay, it's nuclear. It's affecting babies. It's affecting like everything in Libya right now. Well, in Iraq, the proof with deformed babies with.
So let's separate out. There's nobody questions that depleted uranium rounds are used by the military. They're commercial contracts.
Lots
this
of
is well known.
Lots of people.
Okay, I've never met anybody.
It's not well known by society.
Okay, well, so to me, but in the I guess in the crowd of sort of people who know technology, it's a commonly understood thing. It's a mass market product. Let me just finish.
But how does that go on under like?
But because
May I also
that's
make a
nuclear.
distinction?
That is nuclear, isn't
but
it?
it doesn't. So it's well known that it happens. But at least my understanding and the common open science understanding of toxicology is that the impacts of that compared to the overall impacts of war are tiny.
And I think we need to make a distinction, and I push back on you on your concept of secret, and I think you brought up a good point. Not being well understood, say let's say on the front page of the Times and on the National Post, is it does not constitute a secret. A secret is a very organized approach to make sure people don't hear about it. So it may not be widely spread, which we can conceive of. But the idea of secret, and I think you stated that very well in your comment, is very different. Well understood, not widely disseminated, not widely talked about at the kitchen table. And secret.
Let me pick up on this. This is a really good example. So depleted uranium rounds are not secret in the sense that if you go to the military and say, how many do you procure, they'll give you the number. Like it's a public contract.
And
so you're free. You can go. You can file freedom of trade. There's nothing secret about it.
Yeah.
The actual operational use of any military stuff, whether it's a regular 7mm round of a single person. The operational use of militaries are always secret. But the fact that they're using them is a complete non-secret in the sense that you can go and knock on the door and they'll tell you the answer.
Okay.
And so I think that's important.
The same thing can be said with things such as HARP, right? Like where Jesse Ventura went and knocked on the door and they gave him some answers, but they didn't give him all of them. So we can find out some answers about depleted uranium, but do we know all of them? Do we know what's going to happen 50 years down the road? Those areas that have been hit by depleted uranium shells and bombs? I don't think we do.
So you're touching on another topic that's really important, and a topic
it all connects though, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So it's okay. So one of the topics that David and I spend a lot of time thinking about, and me when I think about risk, is it something you just touched on, and it comes into our conversations and many conversations about what if something like a geoengineering program needed to be used, is the way David and I understand that word, is this idea of the unknown unknown. So what happens when we don't know? And that's oftentimes, there are lots of research about how we understand things to talk about. That's where ideas of dread and fear come in. And so the way academics define fear really comes from a combination of how dreadful we think it is and how much we don't know about it. And so ideas that you're bringing up of, well, we're using these rounds, we have toxicology reports right now, but what happens in 50 years is not secret, it's not whatever. At some level, David and I can give you a lot of data, not maybe about spent uranium rounds, about other things that we know a lot about, and give you pretty good ideas, if not very good ideas of what might happen. But I don't think either one of us, and David, you can jump in, at some level recognize that there are unknown unknowns that exist when engaging with technology. And so that is a very real thing, and we can push the science and ask the questions, but there is some uncertainty, and there is uncertainty in everything we do.
I forget who made a nice comment about the fact that we maybe this names and stuff. Estrella, who's saying that we often think of it, build a technology first, and then cars first, and then seatbelts.
Simone.
That's you. Sorry, Simone. Sorry to mix up.
That's okay.
So yeah, so agreed. The unknown unknowns are there, and we think about them for the things we work on.
And try to minimize them
Yeah.
as we talk about it, talking about it.
So can I just, because I'm very grateful that you're sharing and being very open with us.
Yes.
I think it's amazing. I'd like to suggest, because a lot of my research is on the internet, and there's lots of people putting a lot of stuff out there, but I really highly recommend, I'm surprised that you haven't watched the movie, because obviously you've been threatened with this chemtrail issue. And this movie has you speaking, I just want, like, as a, to be respectful, has you speaking and saying things that I can see why people are angry at you, because the way it's presented is that there's
You're almost
I want to share my reaction too.
I've always watched the movie, and I've seen little segments of it. But the point is, I know he was clear to me he was cutting it that way. He came in. He wasn't a normal documentary person that comes in with just a kind of an idea. Just let some good documentary makers come to try and let everybody express their real views.
Right.
It was completely clear that wasn't that gentleman's interest. He had a preconceived view,
right.
And he deliberately, and you can do it to anybody. I could take the stuff you said if I was a skilled editor, and I can make you say anything under the sun by just putting little clips in. And so, to me, why am I going to bother watching it? I really enjoy talking with you people because you're really people sitting here.
Yeah.
But this thing just makes me frustrated.
So can I ask you for my next, because I want to be prepared when I see you the next time. Like, I'd like to support you in what you're looking for. And what I did here was that, if I found an engineering, you said an engineering document.
Yeah.
So if you could be more specific, and you don't have to say it right now, even an email of what you mean by like a research document, that would help me, one. And two, when we come back to the table and talk about chemtrails, when you were speaking about, because you were at the American Association of Advanced Science Conference in San Diego. So were you speaking of a project called aerosol spraying with chemicals? What do I call it that you were speaking of?
So what I was speaking of was this thing that we call geo-engineering, which we publish lots about. And so I was talking about a particular set of ideas about how we might put sulfur or perhaps alumina into the stratosphere, might do it, and what we know about the potential risks and benefits of doing it.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is to, we do it. I wouldn't do it. I'm a scientist. The reason that we might recommend, and at this point nobody's even doing that.
And this is spraying, can I say it's the spraying of sulfur and potentially alumina?
I mean, you can say it. Obviously, in the context of this conversation.
And most importantly, the conversation that David about geoengineering is having is not where commercial airliners fly. It must be much higher in what's called the stratosphere.
And
so it's a little, so it's different, right? So when an airplane flies that high in the sky, it doesn't change the moisture in the sky into what produces a contrail. It flies without producing anything because it's much colder.
Yeah, I mean, you may ask why sometimes contrails look narrow and sometimes spread out. That's to do with the relative humidity in the air, and there's this circulation in the air that's not, we understand, I mean, it's been well understood since the 50s, because as soon as you had jet aircraft, people saw this.
Yes.
And as soon as you had jet aircraft, you could see that sometimes were narrow, and even on one track, you can see it be narrow, wide, narrow, wide. So people said, why is that? And there's been a bunch of research to understand it. And it's well understood, has to do with the way ice crystals form in the upper atmosphere. But the point is, in the stratosphere is very different in lots of ways. Yeah.
Do we have access to that research?
Of course.
Oh, okay, that would be very good for us to have.
Centuries. Not centuries. There's 50 years of public research.
And I just want to touch on that. I think it's important to know that people who are communicating about chemtrails use the internet, and as scientists or as researchers, we communicate through a slightly different medium.
That's very diplomatic.
We communicate in a very different way, and we can debate. Oftentimes, it is not as great, but there's no hiding what David or I talk about. We publish in areas and those things have to get read by people and in their
Peer-reviewed.
conception of science. So peer-reviewed journals.
There's a lot
And
of
we have
that on the
access to them
internet,
on
for
David's-
sure.
On
Yep.
David's website, everything he publishes, we publish together, he publishes with other students,
It's all open.
is there and it's
Yeah.
open. And if there are questions about it, again, send us an email
Let's be
about
clear.
what you
We're
explained.
publicly funded, and we have to be open by law. So in principle, you guys can file Freedom of Information Act requests, and we'll give you it's actually, we'll just give it to you if you ask. Because that's how you, that's why we're here. But we're close to the end of the time, but let me answer, people say, like, what would I want to see to believe it more, for what it's worth. So let me just come back a little bit to the fact, because I've had a bunch, as well as this dialogue, I've had a bunch of email dialogues. I had one last night, actually, getting ready for this with some person in Vancouver. The sheer business of seeing contrails that are sometimes wide and sometimes narrow, to me, proves, just be absolutely clear about this, it doesn't prove there aren't chemtrails, right? But it proves it doesn't just have anything to say about it, because it's a normal, natural phenomena that's well understood and been understood for 50 years. I just keep saying 50, it's probably more like 40. And in fact, there's some sort of chemtrail discussion site, which I think is run by somebody who seems to be less believing, who's actually scanned some old textbooks that show you those pictures that are old. So from my point of view, that it doesn't prove they're not there, but it doesn't say anything at all. So one of the main things the chemtrails people say is they say contrails didn't used to do that. And I say, huh? It's like basic science, they always did that. Yeah. So the sort of things that would make me take this thing seriously, I'm a scientist, I work in probability, so I gradually take things more and more seriously depending on the evidence. But if there was really a really large-scale program, again, there'd have to be, the way people work, this huge set of procurement and engineering documents about moving and stuff. Even if the people doing it didn't know why, the documents still have to be there. You just, in the modern world, can't put large quantities of stuff on commercial aircraft without a lot of people.
What about privately?
Privately what?
They just exist.
Private research, private documents.
They can be private or public documents?
But so I guess we got to figure out what the theory is. If the theory is that it's on commercial aircraft, because that's what people show me the pictures of, then commercial aircraft operating out of commercial airfields, since that's where they operate out of, you'd have to have this huge supply chain to do it. If you're going to introduce enough materials to sea, you've got to be introducing tons, and it's got to move in big trucks.
But David's
question,
I think, is it doesn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, he's not suggesting that it's all Government of Canada documents. If you had big engineering firms or whatever, so in terms of private
or small
or public, it doesn't matter. It's just,
basically,
it exists.
Joe's Aviation Services. The point is, if you want to put a widget on an aircraft that sprays something, let's say you want to, you've got a contract with somebody to build it, unless you go out yourself. Patents. And that could be, well, patents are sort of irrelevant for things like this.
They're irrelevant. Boeing or Airbus.
Pardon?
How about Boeing or Airbus? So you have to know the CEO
great example
of them, and you got them to say, hey, put this new device. It will improve your fuel efficiency.
Understood. But there has to be, for Boeing or Airbus to do it, there has to be a giant paper trail, because there's all these engineers who know, for safety reasons, that they can't put anything on a civilian aircraft without losing their job, unless there's this big paper trail.
But what about weather modification?
It might be more difficult on civilian aircraft.
Extraordinary.
If they were going to do it on civilian
Extraordinarily difficult. On military aircraft, yeah, of course, it's much easier.
And actually, a lot of the chemtrails that are seen are doing this crisscross type of grid thing, which seems unlikely for commercial aircraft to be doing.
Okay, so again, I don't know what the theory is, but most people who told me have said that they think it's on commercial. They show me pictures of it, obvious, like 747, 767, etc. So, just saying, if that was true, then there's huge stacks of engineering documents somewhere, whether it's at Joe's Aviation Supply House or Boeing or whatever, and one person has to just download the PDF and we're done. That's incredibly strong proof.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand, because Weather Modification Inc. exists, like they're the ones who do the cloud saving.
Right, but we know but you can go visit. You know what they spray.
Yeah,
look
right.
at it.
So I could give you all their information, but I just don't understand how that's going to suddenly change your point of view.
Well, because it's not chemtrails. You can go visit them and you know what you're putting in.
I see.
So, David and I don't sit here, and I don't think the Texas government, the Texas governor basically sent out a prayer recently to say we need to do seeding. So there's no one in this.
Cloud seeding is a normal commercial enterprise. I don't think it actually works very well.
Yeah.
But the point is, these guys, aren't secret. You can just go visit them and go look at what they're spraying. You take a
agree.
sample. They wouldn't.
Well,
believe it.
and here's
and the
another
point
thing.
is, we all know that.
Like
So
the
that's not-
weathermen.
Just to be clear. So
Yeah.
clearly, if chemtrails is a thing, it isn't that thing,
Right.
right? Because that thing is, so if chemtrails
Okay.
is some secret benefit,
I have another question. Then.
just let me finish.
Sure.
It can't be cloud seeding, because cloud seeding is whether it works or not, is a public, well understood thing where they're regulated and they.
You can't combine all of these things into one thing.
Right. I mean, the point is, just to be clear, you're not allowed to go spray chemicals without a permit. So the cloud seeding people file permits, and you can go.
Who's not allowed?
I just have a question
Anybody.
about that because,
Yeah.
like,
You're not allowed to just release.
Are those public or private?
see that I'm trying to ask clarification on these things
Yeah, okay.
too. And
Yeah.
like for example, we have weathermen on TV that will show, it's like anti-radar shaft. Do you know what I'm talking about for that? Okay. So I just want to understand your level of understanding of what a chemtrail is, so I know what not to send you and what to send you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to me, from what I gather, again, I don't obviously believe this, but I'm happy to have a conversation about things I don't see evidence for yet. In fact, I want to get the word belief out. I don't see evidence.
Yeah.
So the thing that people seem to be talking about is large-scale spraying of something from commercial or non-commercial aircraft.
Correct.
And to spray anything at large quantities, you've got to have a supply chain. And so the most obvious way to expose this supposed conspiracy is documents from that supply chain.
So I have more
So
to elaborate on that then.
Let me just do one more second. The point is, that's the kind of thing that would really be convincing. Where showing pictures of contrails that look like radio contrails is
Okay,
like,
so let's elaborate on that, because here's
Yeah.
the thing. Like, for example, the U.S. military especially literally loses 30% of their budget every single year. They can't account for it. And on the date, on September 10th, no, I'm dead serious.
That
It's
is dead true.
Yeah, but anyway, okay. So the day before September 11th, they announced $2.3 trillion was completely unaccounted for. So getting access to the procurement to prove it's being done. Like, for example, a shovel costs, $300, where you and I know we go to the drugstore or to the hardware store and we can get it for $10. So I'm trying to, I just, some things may not be able to document because it is hidden and it's purposely hidden.
Understood, but the point is there would be, if there was such a secret program, people who think sensibly like you and I all think would have an enormous, like if you were working, let's say you're working in Boeing, and your boss says, your boss may have evil intent, okay, but your boss comes to you and says, please engineer this thing to spray stuff we won't tell you about. Somebody's got to engineer it, and you're the engineer. Maybe if there's 10 engineers who asked to do the same thing, maybe 8 of them are going to say, oh yes, I'll just do that. But pretty good chances are, 1 or 2 of them are going to say, hold on, this doesn't smell right to me. I'm going to take let me just finish. I'm going to take the PDF of this order and go blow it to WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
And that's the underlying reason I think there's nothing here.
Okay.
Because you cannot, in order to do the kind of thing you're talking about, you'd have to have thousands of people, not one of whom ever talked.
Well, I'll send you whistleblower information.
Cool.
Because if that's what
Okay.
you're looking for, like, I just want to make sure we know what it is we're
Or
sending
again,
you.
long-term, there are lots of sites that do long-term monitoring of environmental toxins. So there's long-term monitoring of water pollution.
Yep.
Lots of it. There's long-term monitoring of airborne dust. Lots of it. And they're open programs run by normal scientists who have no reason to lie, with lots of checks and balances, that publish these things. And none of them show any increase in these chemicals.
Well, in what in the world are we spraying? They do show it. And that's why I would like you to watch the whole thing.
So isn't it right, again, I haven't watched it, but I've talked to the person who made it, and he showed me what he thought he had.
Yes.
And what they thought they had was this 1 or 2 assays without any continuous sequence, without any clarity about where they came from.
It's not the evidence
It's
that
completely
David
unconvincing.
wants.
It's to be honest, laughable.
I want you to clarify all these things
Okay.
on camera so that people
I'm happy
understand.
to.
Because
But just to be clear,
exactly.
there are people whose job it is, for various ways, and another thing is, it's hard to hide things when monitoring is cheap, right?
Right.
So just collecting water, the point is there are all sorts of companies, for all sorts of reasons, just in Calgary alone, that monitor Calgary water quality, and they keep long-term records. So if there really was an increase in sale, you'd see it. In order to keep all those people quiet, you need to have like Gestapo in the street. and so the issue is, why would I believe somebody? So the answer is about that movie. Somebody came to me who obviously was trying to twist and deceive. You know what they did to my words. He showed me this one assay. They said they didn't have any others. It wasn't even clear whether it was from the soil or the water, which makes a really big difference in interpreting it. And he's making this extraordinary claim. So to me, my view is that, you know, since if this was really happening, you would expect to see in all these long-term monitoring programs, of which there's many run by all these different cities and environmental groups and whatnot, you'd see increases, right? There are lots of environmental groups that don't trust the government, so they have independent monitoring, right? Yes. You'd see increases in these chemicals. Not a single such increase has been reported to me. Could have been true, but I haven't seen a single paper from a kind of normal, regular, we monitor water that says, oh, we've seen more barium in the water. Okay. I haven't seen one.
Okay.
And so that's the basis on which I personally find it hard to believe this is real.
But that's why you're helping us.
Yeah.
Because you're giving us clarification as to what to show ourselves, other people, you, in order to...
I mean, actually, let's go one back to connect back to it in terms of what's hard and easy.
Sure.
So if we're talking about common elements like aluminum or barium, those are really easily measured.
Yes.
So if that was true, it would be just essentially, to me, impossible is a big word, but close to impossible to imagine you could do that large scale and not have it be noticed, because there's all these independent monitoring. The stuff that, Sorry, Estrella? Esther was mentioning about, conceivable use of odd organic neurotransmitters we don't know about so well that might affect behavior. That is something that actually would be harder to catch because there's less consistent monitoring. There's a very large number of biological chemicals we don't have systematic monitoring. So if somebody was introducing a little bit of something into the food, it wouldn't necessarily be caught because we don't have a systematic way to monitor it.
I know a lot of doctors that talk about the non-lethal way too.
Understood.
Yep, for sure.
That's how just to give you a sense of how I see it. Whereas the main chemtrails claims involve normal chemicals that we monitor anyway in thousands of monitoring sites. And so that's why I don't find one person giving me something that they paid for in a single data, not connected to anything else. It just seems silly.
But
it seems, I'm not necessarily bad intention. I mean, people want to protect their kids. That's great. Yeah. But it just doesn't seem
And in both in the
sensible.
States and in Canada, that government agencies and others have that raw, real-time data that we download and often download. And so there's government ones and private ones, and that's available online, and you can pull the data and look at geological textbooks and see, what may be an average and what may seem different, and use that, to inform your decision. But I echo David. I think taking bigger data sets, so not, as you mentioned, not just the average, and looking and in statistics and in these probability things that we work in, the more data we have, the more likely we are to see the signal for the noise.
Let's go back. We got to go in a second. Let's go back to the one example. So actually, a lot of, not my work so much, but work of my very close colleagues at Carnegie Mellon has been on air pollution.
Okay.
There are, one of the things we had in Pittsburgh, an EPA super site. So this is a site that does the top quality monitoring of local air pollution. There are 50 people, roughly, a large number of people who work on it in a normal civilian environment. It's extremely hard to keep stuff secret. I mean, inquisitive grad students, lots of professors, etc. We measure all sorts of stuff in the air, basically, all these funny trace chemicals and particles and so on. And why are we doing that? To try and figure out how much air pollution is killing us. We have a very real problem. Like I said, tens of thousands of people are being killed by air pollution. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's normal science. And so we look at the changes in the amount of different pollutants at hospital admissions and we correlate them. That's how we know how many people are being killed. Yep. So during days with more air pollution, more people are admitted to hospital and there are more fatalities. That's how we know it. Yeah. So with all that monitoring, if there was really large quantities of some of these new elements in, you'd see it easily.
Yeah.
I think we can all appreciate your perspective in helping us bring the level of our game up a notch in order to be able to enter the minds and belief systems of yourselves. And so that I think that's something we just, or maybe I'll speak for myself, I tend to believe things more easily, but I can appreciate where you're coming from, and I highly respect it. And I think if we up our game and give you that what you require, especially with your commitment to get on board and dedicate your life to exposing it, that's a wonderful.
Of
course, of course.
That's a big if.
Of course, like that's what that was all. Yeah.
Can we get on record too that you probably are really tired of getting some emails that are threatening? I can't believe that. I'm very sorry to hear that. But you know,
just delete them.
Exactly. So you know, we are appreciative of you giving us all audience so that we can tell the community, okay, look. Yes. Okay, quit with the ugliness for first.
Well,
but second of all, exactly.
Well, thank you very much for saying that.
Yeah.
So actually, we do pretty much have to wrap up. But this has been great, and I feel like there's been, you know, it's always hard with just me sitting up and doing more talking. But there's been a fair amount of people giving their opinions, and I'd be willing to do this again or to find other people to talk to. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving forward, do we have a commitment from all of us to take on the, I would quote unquote, burden of proof, or the honor of proof?
Honor,
It's a gift, right? It really is a gift. This opposition and this resistance that we have around us to learn from is totally a gift. Do we have a commitment from you as well to, A, watch your video that you're on? Not your video, but the video that you're in.
He doesn't have to watch it.
I guess I'd rather spend my hour talking with real people.
Right.
Like I talked with the guy who made the video. I was there. I mean, Holly watched the whole thing. I've seen little clips, and it's clear that he's deliberately intercutting for effect. So why am I going to waste my time watching it?
I guess what I'm getting at is moving forward, and you talked about building a bridge from both sides. We all have our own individual perspective, but we seem to kind of have a group perspective, and you have your scientific perspective. Is there something that you can do on your part moving forward, or when we convene again, that you can maybe let us know that you're willing to do, just to maybe broaden your perspective a little bit? And so that we can maybe have interesting.
So within time limits, I'd be willing to do some of like this question about atmospheric deposition just came up. Some of you may know there's a geo-engineering Google group you can subscribe to. And so actually somebody just raised this question on Google group, and Ken Caldera went and found some papers that have these long-term monitoring data. So I'd be happy to do some of that, because to me that's kind of the gold standard of looking for changes in the environment.
And I think this summer I will be spending some time doing some basic. So creating some public documents from David and I point of view, working from some of the atmospheric physics. And I know there's another site that David has mentioned that has spent a fair amount of time starting to do some of that.
Yeah, that's fair. So, I mean, you have my commitment that I'm willing to spend a little more time on this, because I've basically got a lot of people who clearly care about it, and I'm happy to talk. I mean, there are limits to how much time I want to spend on it, but all those limits would change with what I found out. I mean, if I got one document that really looked very serious, then I'd say, I should spend more time on this.
Yeah.
So,
and do we have an idea, I'm not sure, do we have an idea of, as a group, when we can meet again?
We'll do that follow-up with
Holly.
Holly.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got an email group. I'd be happy. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, tentatively, let's say in the fall, early fall.
Early fall, tentatively.
And when we find these documents that you addressed, we're going to send them.
If you have documents like that,
live.
Well, first of all, if they're real documents and it's really hard evidence and it was really true, then that means there really is a conspiracy, and that means there are people using force to stand it out. Think through the logic. I obviously don't think this is true, but if it's really true, you would probably want to send it to many places at once, so nobody could step them out, and you want to think about what the chain of document control was that got it to you. And that's the standard stuff of any sequence.
So how many links in the chain do you want?
Yeah, if a document's stamped, I mean, a single document that, I mean, basically, if there was something that came from Boeing and said we made this thing and it had a real engineer's name on, you could call up the engineer, you're done. I mean, that's a huge thing. I'd be very surprised if there is such a thing.
But you're saying if patents are void, they're null and void, even if they come from a military.
If you're talking about distributing material, you don't need a patent to engineer something to do that.
Patenting invention patents for geo-engineering.
So one important thing to know about patents are sort of a cheap way to publish. It only costs about, even to do it with a fancy lawyer, it only costs about $5K to file a provisional. To do your own is only like $1K.
Okay.
And nobody checks whether it's doable. So you can patent any nonsense. So one of you can walk out of here and patent some kind of weird, mind-controlled and worked with ELF rays, and you can send in the patent office, and they'll stamp it. Big deal.
And it just
Okay, it doesn't
says
prove
there's
that.
Now, what about the existing patents with the theories, like you say they are, along with pictures of them, those patents being used, those exact designs being used on airlines?
I mean, I guess I don't know what you mean, but send it to me.
Okay, like if the patent had the drawing of the design and how it was put together and what it was supposed to do, and then there was a picture of a plane that had a very similar or not identical.
I mean, that would be amazing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
I mean,
All right.
but I think in general, because patents are so easy to publish, they don't mean much.
Okay.
And they simply
That's
carve
what
out
we
a
make
space that says you could make this
Yeah.
if you wanted to. It
Right.
doesn't mean it exists.
I mean, so the point is, there's no problem me patenting chemtrails, right? I just write up some, I send to the patent office.
Yeah, but I'm not just- I'm
There's
not just
so
going
many
by
years
patent, I'm
behind
going
even
by, like,
examining
things that I've
that.
seen based on
But
that.
there's so many years behind an even examination that you can get a provisional on basically
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. But when there's other things backing those patents up to prove that they're
Sure,
existing.
that's my point. It's just the other stuff that matters.
Yeah,
more than
yeah.
that.
Okay, fair enough.
We're going to stay up here.
Yeah.
Of course.
All right.
But
We're going to run. Yes, I
you
don't
guys
know.
go ahead.
Is there a
Can
problem?
we-
I'm not sure if I want your email in case you get more direct.
Let's say you spend 10 more minutes if you want.
10 more minutes.
Yeah.
Would be very hard to fake. Just a sec. Okay. And so that's an example where in the partly, I think, industry-funded PR campaign, you'll see all sorts of wild things. And when I go talk to my neighbors in the oil industry, they'll say that. But I don't believe there is one person who really works as a normal scientist, just kind of working along, who thinks that.
Right. You see, out here we have such a conservative agenda, and out here we do have the oil companies. Most of us are employed by oil companies. So, yeah, you do have a strong opinion of that out on the street here.
Well, first of all, I don't really get that. I have lots of friends who work in the
Yeah.
oil patch. I happily invest money in the oil patch. I drive a car.
Yeah, exactly.
They are not. I'm not against the oil patch.
No.
But in any sort of simple black or white way.
Yep.
But also, the oil patch is not acting in its own best interest to pretend that the science isn't right.
Yes.
You know, RJR Nabisco didn't, in the end, make better decisions for making money for the tobacco shareholders by lying.
Yeah. All right.
What's your opinion on unilateral geoengineering? All of them being combined, like HARP, Blue Beam, all these.
So I don't know what HARP is in
Okay.
geoengineering.
Okay, so HARP with the lower, you just spoke about higher and
As
lower.
far as I know, no, HARP was a experiment to test
And it's
ionospherically
it's
effectivity.
able to superheat the ionosphere with
Don't believe
high
that's
altitude
true.
or frequencies.
So, I mean, this is physics I pretty much understand, and you're making claims that don't jibe with my understanding of the world. And so I guess, you know, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
Well, like an extraordinary claim, like 48 hours before the giant tornado in Missouri touching down, HARP researchers predicted it based on satellite imagery coming from HARP and being projected back down the Earth through
There's
HARP.
no satellite imagery coming from HARP.
It's on. It's all over YouTube. You guys have been watching it for years.
You know what? I can just add to what he's saying because I'm in that loop of people that are.
So sorry, HARP is a project that owns satellite imagery?
No. You can see the satellite on weather pattern, like satellite imagery.
Yeah.
You can see an erratic formation, like among cloud imagery and different weather patterns. You'll all of a sudden see like I don't even know how to describe it. It's like it's just a.
But the satellites aren't HARP satellites, is that
No,
right?
No.
These are weather satellites.
So
We're
you just,
seeing the
I thought you
imagery
just
from
said.
HARP.
What do you mean the imagery from HARP? I
Like
don't understand.
wherever there's a HARP station located, for example,
There are
Anchorage,
many
Alaska.
HARP stations?
Yeah, Anchorage, Alaska. Yeah.
It's a
Midwest.
measurement of the energy being.
So then you're
projected.
assuming that basically people they conceal them as something else or something?
See, sorry, I didn't understand that question.
Well,
there's just multiple HARP antenna arrays positioned
Okay.
throughout the planet in different countries.
And then they're like, so lots of scientists have confirmed that it's capable of actually raising the ionosphere.
One of the readings
Higher
that.
up, pushing it into the upper atmosphere. Yeah.
It's Tesla's old technology.
Yeah,
You're just talking about. I mean, it's just infrared heat or microwave radio frequency heating.
But to tie that in with the chemtrails, though, with the barium in the atmosphere and stuff like that,
What's
if you
the
were firing
connection?
high frequency.
I mean, I'm just like
So can I
baffled.
take a shot?
Okay, so I understand about making a radio wave that heats things. The heating is utterly trivial compared to the natural heating, and like really basic physics said that if you took all human civilization right now is about 12 terawatts, the entire power of everything in the world.
12 terawatts.
Okay, the solar power is factors of thousands of times bigger than that. So, and obviously the HARP sites aren't using all of human energy, they're using a tiny, tiny fraction of it.
Yeah. Well,
So there's some really basic stuff that just doesn't...
To speak on free energy,
yeah.
could I just get some perspective here of what your understanding is of the destruction of the World Trade Center towers? What do you think caused their dissolution?
Airplanes flying into them.
Okay.
Okay.
This is very important because if you're a person that loves the evidence and the science and wondering how HARP may have the potential to heat the ionosphere, as we're alluding to, I would recommend...
Actually, hold on. I mean, and you guys obviously may not believe, but I do believe there's some pretty basic sort of facts about science
to
do with conservation of energy. So actually, pretty much, I mean, for me to be convinced that HARP can heat up the ionosphere a lot, I like to see a physics-based argument.
Well, I'd like
conspiracy-based argument.
I understand. So that's why I recommend highly, if you really want to be respected amongst everyone, not just those that think they like you do, I would recommend you read Dr. Judy Wood's Where Did the Towers Go? Talk about a definitive, empirical, evidence-based science that could blow your mind. Like it's all science. It's so scientific. It's this big, 500 pages. Dr. Judy Wood. Where Did the Towers Go? You read that, and then I think it'll give you a connection to the possibilities of HARP, Tesla's work.
Actually, Dr.
Everything.
Keith, I've been meaning to order that book, so I'll order two and give you one.
It's absolutely incredible. I just finished reading it.
Okay. Sonia?
It's amazing.
Simone?
So I'm trying to get around this because we won't get anywhere if there's no acknowledgement that chemtrails exist or what chemtrails are. So my question is, there was a conference at the American Association of Advanced Science, which in the film, which you haven't watched, they have you speaking at that conference. And there was questions asked to you about the spraying, I don't want to call it chemtrails, let's just call it
contrails.
Whatever, the spraying of aluminum, barium, and strontium, the aerosol spraying of it. And, quote, what you said in the movie was this, and I want to know what you're referring to, so then we can get around the whatever you want, who cares what it's called. Right? Okay. So the problem of how we govern it is hard. The more we do research, the less easy it will look. The more
system. Plants need CO2 to breathe. I'm not a politician, so I'm not for or against things. I'm for openness, telling the truth, trying to be rational, and trying to help people, including including you folks and politicians, whoever comes to ask me, make better decisions about these things.
Gotcha.
So, do I think that if we double or triple the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, it will warm up? Yes. I think that that's science that has actually been pretty well established for more than a century.
Yeah.
That is about as well established at this point as gravity.
What do you think about the scientists that don't believe in global warming, that they believe that's a part of the Earth's process and that it's not human related as much as we want to believe it is?
Well, I don't know what you mean by want to believe. I personally would be wonderful if it wasn't, because then we could go on and deal with other things.
Right.
So I don't buy this want to believe stuff. I don't know, I mean, this is a polarized issue. So first of all, like any pollution debate, there are going to be winners and losers. So when we debated whether or not smoking caused cancer, or when we debated whether or not air pollution killed people, people were paid by the industries to try and make the science seem more complicated than it was to avoid regulation. In fact, some of exactly the same people, so some of the leaders, like Fred Singer, who were the leaders of the campaign to say climate change isn't real, were also the leaders and employed by the tobacco industry and ozone to say the same thing. I met him, he's a nice guy, that's his job.
Exactly.
And do I think, and one of the clever things those people tend to do is they say stuff which is true but misleading to people who don't know the science. So I don't actually know anybody in the world. Pardon?
I said, boy, that sounds familiar.
No, here's a simple way to do it. You say CO2 isn't the main greenhouse gas, it's water vapor. Well, yeah, that's true. That's like a basic truth you get in a first year course on climate physics. It doesn't prove anything. That's what all the models have in them. Or you say the ice ages weren't caused by climate change, but by CO2. And the answer is no, they weren't. No scientist thinks they are.
Yep.
Or you say maybe it's the sun. But let's just take one example. It's really easy to say. Some people say it's the sun doing the warming, but
Right.
actually no serious scientist that I know of in the world says that. And here's why. Because if it was the sun, you'd expect the lower atmosphere to warm and the upper atmosphere to warm.
Yeah.
It turns out from, and I'm going to have a big physics lesson, but from really basic physics that you can't hide, it's like stuff that you get in undergrad, that if the Earth was warming from CO2, you expect the lower part to warm. You actually expect the stratosphere to cool, because the stratosphere radiates more effectively, radiates heat radiation. And so if it was the sun doing it, you'd expect the upper atmosphere and the lower atmosphere to warm. If it was CO2, you'd expect the opposite.
Right.
So then what do we see? You can guess the answer. What you see is that the stratosphere is cooling and the lower atmosphere is warming. From really basic data that
Complicated the environmental effects will look. The side effects are going to be harder to manage.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about?
I'm talking about this possibility that has become to be called geoengineering. The possibility that as a way to counter, partially counter, the warming that we're going to see from carbon dioxide, we would deliberately put reflective aerosols of various kinds, sulfates or alumina, not aluminum, alumina, difference, in the stratosphere. Nobody is doing this that I have any evidence of. I mean, of course, people might be, but I don't have any evidence of it, and I'd be personally stunned because of my understanding of the way lies do and don't work inside governments. But we can talk about that. But my understanding is that nobody's doing this, but people, including me, are looking at the risks and benefits of doing it in a research, and we're also working with people, either governments directly or people who work in various civil society organizations around the world to try and talk about how we would govern it if we ever did.
So as you, from your knowledge, there's been no government approval or government funding or organizations that have been testing this anywhere in the world?
There's one example. So the Russians, I think for deliberate provocation, there's a Russian, what's his name? Yuri Israel. Yuri Israel and crowd flew a helicopter, and I don't know what it did. It was like a trivial, stupid thing. They did it purely for provocation. It's kind of the Russians liking to provoke business. And so they called it a test of geoengineering. It actually didn't test anything, and it was silly. But that's the one example that I know about where somebody did something and said, this is a test of geoengineering.
I have just one more.
Did something outside. I mean, we do lots of stuff inside.
Inside, but not in the atmosphere.
Yeah, but in the atmosphere, that's the only.
There's no spraying clouds.
I want to give you a sample, something to give some background of how I think about that. So, obviously, governments lie and deceive routinely, but there are limits to how they can lie, and those limits are people's willingness to speak out. And so, if you have a government lying about something which most people think they're right to lie about, then people will tend to keep the secret. But I mean, for there to be a program like you guys are talking about, a huge program, people talk about them on civilian aircraft.
That you're looking at exploring.
No, because we wouldn't. No.
No.
So the things we're talking about wouldn't make visible contrails because they'd be too high. They wouldn't use civilian aircraft because they can't fly that high. They'd be totally different. What you guys are apparently talking about with chemtrails is the idea that things that you guys look at them binoculars, right? And they look like regular aircraft, right?
Correct.
So as I understand the sort of proposed chemtrail conspiracy is that regular civilian aircraft are dumping large quantities of toxic materials to do something. I don't know what, because that's not my conspiracy theory.
Right.
But to do that would require an enormous supply.
I think for a lot of us, I mean, just in honesty, I don't see how people can't see the chemtrails.
Okay.
Yep. And then some of the questions I have is, from your point of view, the barium, the aluminum oxide, the strontium, the things that are coming down into our plants, our rivers, the beautiful Bow River. I grew up swimming. Oh, incidentally, that is my father.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great picture.
Isn't that wonderful?
That's terrific.
He
cool.
used to jump off the Louise Bridge into the Bow River. I mean, this is my parents' town. They did so much for me. I just feel really devoted to a voice for all of us regarding, possible complications that can come to human health, plants, the whole kit and caboodle.
Got it.
One other thing comes to my mind right away. As the chemtrails blanket out, do you think there's any proof, are you aware of any, that that it decreases the temperature in terms of mitigating global warming. I mean, as I understand it, the chemtrails can do their blanketing, and they really don't have any effect overall on temperature.
I mean, I don't know what a chemtrail is, so I don't.
So what's your position in all of the geoengineering and the things that a lot of us have heard you say on what in the world are they spraying regarding climate change?
That's a pretty broad question. I mean, climate change. I mean, which question are you asking?
Okay, let me be specific.
Yeah.
If you're not aware of chemtrails, what are you aware of?
Well, that's an M. I mean, yes.
Here,
I'm not trying to be evasive, but I
how
guess
about
all the things I've heard.
Can I just come in for a minute?
I mean, I guess let me give you some background. I've worked for 20 years on basically various environmental issues, air quality issues, and climate, both as a doing policy analysis, doing kind of environmental science, and doing technology development. And I've worked probably over that whole time, spent like 10% of my time on geoengineering, which to me means, I mean, just to be clear, let's say what this term means. So to me it means the possibility that people might want to partially and imperfectly counteract some of the risks of global warming. And to be clear, global warming will have benefits and risks and so on, but partially counteract those risks by deliberately cooling the atmosphere by making it more reflective somehow. There are various ways you could do it.
Right.
And my understanding is that essentially, I mean, with tiny quibbly exceptions, nobody is remotely close to actually doing this, and I don't advocate doing it, but I do advocate thinking about it seriously.
Wow, okay.
You're really against CO2. That's really what you're against, is that we're global warming and people...
I wouldn't say, I'm not comfortable saying that. I mean,
That's fair.
CO2 is a natural part of the Earth.